After his two mixed-reviewed films, Shyamalan's decline furthered even more with his next pair of films, The Bad. But what's interesting is that at this moment, Shyamalan's career faced sort of a crossroads, being attached to direct a film adaptation of a book that would end up having a lot of potential behind it.
The Life of Pi was a favorite book of Shyamalan's, as the main character was an Indian boy who was also from Pondicherry, India. And years before the film came out, he was attached to direct before he eventually turned it down. It almost felt predestined, but I was hesitant because the book has kind of a twist ending. I was concerned that as soon as you put my name on it, everybody would have a different experience, whereas if someone else did it, it would be much more satisfying, I think. Expectations, you've got to be aware of them. I hope they make a beautiful movie. And it was. The movie by Ang Lee went on to be a box office hit and win the most Oscars of the year.
But I would be remiss to say that Shyamalan's career definitely would have gotten back on track if he had taken the job. There are a million different ways he could have made the movie, and it still could have potentially been a flop. Especially considering that a lot of people initially said that Life of Pi was an unfilmable book. As good as the book is, the fact that the eventual movie is as good as it was is kind of astounding.
And while I do understand his reasoning, since, like I said, people were growing tired of his twist endings, I still think it might have been better for him anyways if he had taken the gamble on this movie instead of his next movie.
Especially since his next film was Lady in the Water.
An apartment building superintendent rescues a young woman from the apartment's pool. When she tells him that she is actually a water nymph, named Story, trying to make the journey back to her home, he works with his tenants to protect his new friend from the creatures that are trying to keep her from leaving. This was based off a children's book that Shyamalan wrote for his kids, and was his first predominantly badly reviewed movie, drawing harsh criticisms from a lot of critics for its story, its lack of excitement, and focus.
And I completely agree. This was a very weird, bizarre attempt at a movie. The movie felt like constant lead-up without any real payoff.
It gives us such a wide variety of seemingly interesting characters, though they all seem attached to some stereotype. It's a very jumbled movie. On top of that, it's just absurd at times, which wouldn't be so bad. I mean, all Shyamalan films had their absurd moments before this, but they spend no time trying to convince us of anything here, or the characters for that matter. They just go along with everything. We're honestly supposed to accept that this woman has been living in an apartment pool and no one has noticed? Maybe if she was living in a nearby pond or lake, but staying in a pool just seemed stupid. There's a lot of absurdities. The seriousness one character has when she's talking about what she believes to just be a bedtime story, the way people are just instantly convinced she's a nymph, all these backgrounds about these creatures and these rules to get her back. It's too convoluted and it never gives us any reason to believe, and I just kept thinking, my god, how was this done by the same guy who brought us Unbreakable, where he understood the importance of taking time to fully accept weird circumstances? Here, it's just, screw it, doesn't matter how strange it is, they'll believe it. And a lot of critics especially criticize M. Night's role as being overly indulgent. M. Night had given himself cameos before. It was another one of his many trademarks, along with his twist endings and setting films in or around Philadelphia. But they'd always been decently small, aside from maybe the one in Signs. But not only was this one much larger than Signs, but he cast himself as a writer who is foretold to have philosophies that will eventually change the world. This is where people were starting to be aware of his ego. Even more so when reading the other book on the events, The Man Who Heard Voices, or How M. Night Shyamalan Risked His Career on a Fairy Tale.
Risk wasn't worth it, was it?
Not helping was including a cynical critic as something of an antagonist who doesn't fare so well in the end. A movie making comments about its own writing and snubbing to critics could have worked, and there have been similar stuff like that in the past, but you better make sure it is a damn good film. This wasn't.
But the fact that the movie is so pretentious and so high on itself without even being good is just kind of the icing on the already very iced cake. And the advertising's pretty misleading too. The movie seems to market itself like a horror movie, but in the end it's not really that scary.
People made similar complaints about The Village doing this, but whereas The Village was at least creepy and unsettling, here it was totally overblown. It really is just a fantasy movie that's constantly shot in the dark. But just listen to one of these title sequences from a DVD trailer.
How I wonder who you are. Lady in the Water.
I did like the musical score and the some odd moments of humor that were still funny in an odd sort of way. Next one.
Then the happening came. A pandemic believed to be some kind of neurotoxin being leaked into the populated areas results in people just killing themselves. A husband and wife who are having troubles of their own try to outrun the invisible killer along with most of the East Coast, eventually discovering that they're being killed by the plants.
This was also Shyamalan's first R-rated film, so there was a little bit of anticipation to it already, especially considering that a lot of people were hoping Lady in the Water was just a fluke. But as the teenage audience who snuck into the movies will tell you, the happening ain't happening. No?
For an R-rated film, a lot of the violence is very underplayed. I mean, I wasn't expecting Saw here, but I assumed it would be a little bit gorier given the concept. All the normally good actors seem miscast in the roles. They all seem confused. And yeah, this is a confusing situation they're in, but still, a lot of the reactions just seem off. The whole movie seems off, and despite the backstory and feelings they share, they still feel very underdeveloped. There's a lot of weird setup scenes, weird bits of dialogue, and weird side characters. It's just got an all-around weird feeling to it, surrounding the equally weird idea that plants are fighting back by making people kill themselves.
But here's the thing. Shyamalan claims that from the beginning, this movie was meant to be a callback to the old B-movies of the 50s and 60s, with the cheesiness and the paranoia and whatnot. And, well, in that case, it's still not good, but it's at least understandable.
The soundtrack made by James Newton Howard, who's done all of Shyamalan's movies since The Sixth Sense, while seeming enchantingly suspenseful, also seemed a little old-fashioned, which might actually be fitting to a B-movie theme. And so would the underplayed gore.
And I believe Shyamalan. I don't think this is a case of Tommy Wiseau claiming that the god-awful movie The Room was meant to be a dark comedy after realizing how bad people thought it was. But this was probably not the time for Shyamalan to do this, especially when he's trying to come out of the slow decline he was in. But there is some amusement in watching the film. The movie is enjoyably goofy, and some people even said it seemed like a parody of Shyamalan movies. Plus, how can you not crack a smile at that tagline? We've sensed it. We've seen the signs. Now, it's happening. I still don't know whether that's idiotic or ingenious.